Mike, good morning. Shalom Aleichem. We're having also technical difficulties from Eretz Yisrael. See, I think the issue is when the Rav is learning the daf in Eretz Yisrael, there's a fire in Eretz Yisrael. There's a higher madrega. There's fire coming out of his head, like Yonatan ben Uziel, and it interferes with the 5G. So there's some data issues there. So Baruch Hashem, today's daf is Kuf Samech Tet. Yesterday we had some technical difficulties. We're actually going to pick up on Kuf Samech Ches at the top, at the Gemara. Now, yesterday we actually mentioned, Rabbi Silver explained, someone can be a big Talmud Chacham, but if he's looking at women, to be makir women, staring at women, then maybe he's not such a big Talmud Chacham. We actually see this, it's a biblical concept also, that Eliezer, Eved Avraham, obviously learned Shas with Avraham, but there was no problem, no one tried to switch Rivka with him. But Yaakov Avinu, they tried to switch Rivka and Leah, and Lavan was indeed successful switching Rivka and Leah. Now there's an interesting drasha that I heard, that when Rachel gave Leah the signs so that Yaakov would think it's her, that she was actually explaining to her just the halachot of being married and how to act in a marriage. It wasn't like a thumbs up or like a special like handshake or something. It was just the halacha of how to be a wife. And Rachel had given Leah the impression that Leah was supposed to be his wife, that Rachel and Yaakov had agreed that she would go first. And if that's the pshat, then Leah never really knew that she wasn't supposed to be the first wife of Yaakov, that Rachel had been so deep in respecting her feelings. And then it gives us a new appreciation of a conversation later on that Leah and Rachel have, when Leah says, Talmud lo hamat kachtech et ishi, that Leah said, Rachel says, could I have the dudayim? It's a segula for fertility. We just had this. It just should sound familiar in Vayetze, just last week. And Leah says, what, it's not enough you took my husband? Now we might think like, oh, is Leah joking? So no, if the pshat is that Leah thought she was supposed to be the first wife, then she really thinks this. And Rachel was tremendously, even more sensitive than we thought when she allowed Leah to substitute for herself. So we had some homework yesterday, but not everyone did it. I heard some guys listening to the recording. So we're going to pick up on Kuf Samachet at the very top line of the Gemara. Now remember, the Mishnah was about erasing a star. What do you do when you erase a star? How do you be Mekayim, stand up the replacement star? What do you write? You write B'mot of Tlata. Three of us were sitting down. That's the judges. Havina, we were sitting. Anu. Ploni, that's the names of the judges. Hotzi, Ploni ben Ploni, Shtar Machuk. He took out an erased star. Now, it's not necessarily the whole thing was erased. Even if part of it's erased, that's going to be puzzle. You need to write up a replacement. Lefanenu. So he brought it to the court. Biyom Ploni on a certain day. Ploni Edav. These were the witnesses on the star. Im Kosovo. And if this kiyum, this replacement star certification, also says who's kaknu ledusin, that we, the judges, examined, we were chokek, we carved into the edus shel edim of the witnesses, v'nimsat edutun mechuvenet, and we find their testimony aligns. They've proven the contents of the star. Gove, you can use this replacement star to collect your loan. Ve'eno tzarich lahavi raya, you don't have to bring the witnesses in again when you actually go to collect with a replacement star, because what the judges did was they went ahead and checked out the testimony, made sure it aligned with the contents of the star when they were writing up the replacement. If it doesn't have this extra line that we checked it out, then when he goes to use replacement star to collect, he needs to bring additional proof with the witnesses. Nikra puzzle. If it's ripped, it's puzzle. Nitkara kosher. If it's ripped, it's kosher. So in English, we just say ripped, but in Ivrit, there's something called the reflexive, the hispoil or hitpael form. So nikra is just ripped, it's passive. Nitkra, we would translate with this tav, it makes it reflexive, it means something happened to it. That's the diktu, that's the grammar in Ivrit. So we would say it got ripped, it became ripped. So nikra sounds like someone's doing it on purpose, nitkara sounds like it could have been an accident. So nimchak or nitoshtesh, if it's erased or it's smudged, it's wiped off, the ink got wiped. In Mishumo Nikar, if the roshem, the indentation, when you put pen to paper, at least put quill to parchment, and you're pressing down, it makes a little mark into the paper. So even if the ink gets smudged, sometimes you can see the indentation in the parchment. So if Yishuma Nikar kosher, then you could still validate the contents by looking at these faint impressions in the parchment. Heichi dami nikra, heichi dami nitkara. So the Gemara asks the question that I alluded to with my 10-second grammar lesson. They say, what do you mean nikra versus nitkara? Doesn't both of that mean it became ripped? Amar Rav Yehuda, nikra kara shel bezdin. Nikra means they ripped it on purpose. It was an official rip in the court. The court ripped up this document so everyone knows it's no good. Nitkara kar she'eino shel beis din. Nitkara means it got ripped, but maybe it wasn't beis din. Maybe it was an accident, or maybe it was sort of an unofficial ripping that somebody did at home, not under the auspices of the court. Heichi domi kar shel beis din. So how does the beis din rip shtarot when they are truly invalid? Am Rav Yehuda, makam edim, makam azman, makam torah. They rip through the place where the witness is signed, where the date is, and the torah, the main part of the shtar that has the names of the parties involved. Abai Amar Shesiver. Abai says it's enough if they do length and width. So it's not just one rip down the middle, it's down the middle, and then you put them together. You go down the middle, you put them together, and you go down the middle again, at a 90-degree angle. So it's Shesi Ve'erev. It's what we call warp and woof, famously from Masechus Shabbos. Okay. Hanhu Arvoi. There were Arabs making trouble. Outside, nothing's new. Yeah. They were coming to Pumbedisa. The Havuka Onsu Arata Dinche. They were taking over land of Jewish people. And not only were they taking the land, they were, under threat of violence, taking the deeds, so that the Jews couldn't then go to court and get the land back using the deed. Some of the landowners who hadn't been, attacked yet and had their land seized, they came to Abai. Please look at our deeds. They still had their deeds in hand. They hadn't been, attacked yet. Write us a backup deed. So if these Arabs come with their swords drawn and their RPGs and stuff, and they come and seize our land and seize our deeds, we'll have this backup deed somewhere in the safe deposit box, or we'll leave it by the court, and we'll be able to get our land back. So write us a backup. If they steal one from us, we'll have this backup be done in our hands. Amar lahu, ma'avid lahu. He says, really, what can I do for you? I'm not allowed to write a backup shtar. The Amar Rav Safra, because Rav Safra said, Ein kodvid shtei shtarot also the achad. We never write two deeds on one piece of land. Dilma tarif v'chadar tarif. Maybe someone will use the deed to seize the land back or seize it back from his creditors, but he has a backup deed, so he'll go ahead and he'll do it again. He'll seize the land twice. So these landowners were really scared. They were really bothering Abai for some sort of solution. Amrle the Safra, so he told his sofer, the court scribe, Zil Kosovlu, yeah, go ahead and write them a deed. But write it, hu alam chak, the shtar should be on erased parchment, ve'edav olinyar, but the witnesses should sign below that on fresh, clean, never erased parchment, the puzzle. That's not a valid shtar to collect with. Now, the interesting thing is, that's not a valid shtar in a Jewish court, but it could be that a secular court, remember they're in Pumbedisa, they're in Bavel, and in some places in Bavel, there was a Jewish court was in charge. There's a Reish Galusa, the Jews had some degree of self-government, but not necessarily had their own court in terms of everything legal, Dina de Machus Dina. So maybe a secular court around Pumbedisa would take these backup shtar out, even though in a halachic court, a real Jewish beis din, they would throw them out because they wrote the shtar on erased parchment and the witnesses on clean parchment below it. And we learned just a couple weeks ago that's always puzzle because it was all an original shtar on clean, fresh parchment, and then somebody erased the top, wrote whatever they wanted, and relied on the original witnesses below. So Abai has done this maybe just to appease the landowners, but maybe also he's given them some way to succeed in secular court to get their land back from the Arab invaders, even though halachically it's not a valid shtar. So you had a question. Maybe the Roshem, the imprint, is still recognizable. When your sofer wrote the shtar the first time on the top before he erased it, maybe he pushed down and we can see the Roshem, the impression in the parchment. Tanya and the Brisa just said, Nimchak o nitashtish. If it's wiped or it's been smeared, if you can still see the shape of the letters, kosher, you could still use that to validate the shtar. So maybe this erased part on the top, they're gonna use the letters and make the court will assume this is a kosher shtar. Amrle mika min shtar me'alya. He says, am I telling myself to write a real shtar up top, then erase the real shtar and write it again? No, aleph base ba'alma kamina. Aleph base, just write letters. You could write a poem. You could just write scribbles, whatever. So that way, when they erase it, the original Roshem is not an original shtar. It's just nonsense letters, just aleph bet, and a court later on, a Jewish court, will not use this in place of a real shtar and collect with achrayus. Taner Banan, Harei Shebava Amar, someone came and said, Avod shtar chavi, I lost my shtar chov, I lost my loan document. Alfal Pisha Amru Eidim, even though the witnesses say, Anu Katavnu, V'chatamnu, we wrote it, we signed it, V'natanu, and we gave it to him, and Natanu lo, Ein Koisvin lo shtar, et shtar. We do not write him a replacement shtar. When does this apply? B'shtar hova. That's for a loan. If the lender loses the loan document, the lender is out of luck. But if it's a sale document, like it's a deed of title, somebody bought a motorcycle and he's got the title to it, we would allow him to write a replacement title. But not achrayos. So if it's sold with achrayos, that means basically Reuven selling Shimon land, and Reuven writes to Shimon, if my creditors, the guys I owe money to, they come and they seize this asset, be it a field or a motorcycle, in repayment of the debt, then I will reimburse you. So achrayos means responsibility. It means Reuven, the seller, is on the hook if his creditors come and seize this asset from Shimon, the buyer. Top of today's daf. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, of shtarei mechak umemkar ein kosvin. Even sale documents, we do not write replacements. V'ken chaya Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, hanoisen matona lechaver. Someone gives a gift to his friend, v'hechzir lo, and he returns the gift. Doesn't want it at a shtar. He returns the shtar. So maybe someone gifted him a field, and he's giving back the shtar, saying, "Hey, I don't want this." Chazra matanato. The gift goes back to the giver. Chachamim omrim, but the sages disagree. They say matana kayemet. They say the gift goes through. The recipient already received the shtar. It was already his. If he wants to give it back, he needs to write a new shtar or have the original giver, go onto the land and do a chazaka, do a kinyan of some sort. It needs to be a kinyan. You can't just give back the original piece of paper. That original piece of paper signified a transaction in one direction, from the giver to the recipient. Now, if the recipient wants to give it back, he needs a new kinyan or a new shtar. Amar mar chutz me'achrayos shabo. When we write a replacement, we don't write achrayos. My time. What's the reason? Amar safra fisha ein kosvin shtei sharot al sadei achat. As we alluded to with the Arab issue that Abaye solved, if you have two shtarot on one land, then the creditors could collect, and then the buyer who has got two shtarot could pull out the shtar again and get reimbursed twice for the same field. Dilma azil balchov, because a creditor might come, Tarif Yonah Hy, he might seize the field, the azil high, mepik chad, so the buyer of this field will come and pull out one deed, the tarif lekuchos, and take property away from the original seller, as he's entitled to, because the shtar has achrayus. The amarle lebalchov, and then the buyer, who's just been reimbursed using one deed, but he still has a backup deed, he's going to say to the balchov, to the creditor of the original seller, shufli, why don't you leave me a little bit, to aikamba, I'll sit on the land again for a few years. I understand you took it back legally, but let me sit here for a few years. The hadar ta tirfa, you come and you collect the land again in satisfaction of a debt. I'll pull out the second shtar. I'll pull out the backup shtar written with achrayus. V'hadar ozil tarif l'kuchos, and I can go and take more property from the original seller. So now it's what's called a kinunya. Kinunya is like a conspiracy, and so the buyer who's holding two deeds can conspire with one of the creditors of the original seller to collect from the original seller two reimbursements because he's holding two deeds. Since they ripped up the first star, de malve of the lender. So the creditor was holding a shtar holva, a shtar to collect his loan. Didn't they rip up his shtar? But my hadar tarfle. So how is he going to come and take the field a second time to allow the buyer to do kanunya, to do shtick, as they call it, to collect twice? If you're going to tell me they didn't rip up that loan document, Rav Nachman taught us, kol tirfa. Delo kasiv bei any tirfa. Now tirfa is a certain shtar that's basically like a warning, we're going to seize your property because you owe someone money. The tirfa is like the first step, really. If you don't pay the halva, the loan document, then the tirfa comes out, and that's the court saying, we are going to collect this land if you don't pay the debt. But any tirfa delo kasiv bei karana l'shtara de malve love tirfa hu. Any such collection warrants, collection paper that doesn't say we tore up the original loan document, that's not valid valid collection. Because you understand what's going on is the lender is holding his shtar halva, his loan document. He comes to court, he says he didn't pay up the loan. They say, okay, we're going to write up this shtar tirfa for you, that's basically saying that you're going to be able to come collect this land, but he can't be holding both the loan document and the shtar tirfa, because then he could collect twice. So they rip up the shtar halva and they write him the shtar tirfa in court. V'kol adrachta, and adrachta is basically the summons, delo kasi bekrona latirfa, that they don't say we tore up the tirfa. And this is step 2 already. Lov adrachta he. It's not a valid adrachta. It couldn't be used to collect the land. This is basically what do they call it? Like foreclosure. This is like a foreclosure deed. So first there's a loan document, then there's a shtar tirfa that we're going to collect if you don't pay, and now a drochta, we're going to foreclose. The bezdin is going to foreclose on this property and give it to the lender if you don't pay. They're called shuma. Now shuma is a shtar of estimation, where the bezdin sends people to estimate the value of this property, because you understand the debt might be $100,000 and the property might be $200,000. So you can't just sell the whole thing and give the whole thing to the lender. That's not fair. So the court will assess the value of the land and then advertise that it's going to be for auction, it's going to be for sale, and so then the proceeds will pay off the loan, and whatever extra is going to go back to the original owner, the original debtor. Kol shuma, that's the shtar of estimation of the value. Delokazi be korona ledrachta. It doesn't write we tore up the foreclosure document. Love shuma ki. It's not a valid shtar of estimation, and it can't be used to sell the land and reimburse the creditor. Lo tzricha. So we wouldn't need this. So we wouldn't need to be worried, because we already ripped up the shtar halva, and he went through that process with the 4 different shtar, the halva, the tirfa, the adrachta, and the shuma to collect the land, repay the debt. So he doesn't have another shtar halva. But what does the creditor possibly have? He comes mikoach ahavate. He comes from the power of his father. He could make a claim, this was my father's land. Now, if that really was his father's land and people around town know it used to be his father's land, then yes, technically, if he could come and get that land back, and then since the guy he took it from is holding a second shtar, that's the backup deed with a charayas, then he would go back to the original seller and collect twice, because he has 2 deeds, which bottom line is, that's why we don't write 2 deeds, halacha l'maisa. Amalei Ravacha Medifti L'Ravina Lamalei L'Meimar Le L'Bolchov Shufli. So why would going back to the Kanunya case, where the buyer is conspiring with the creditor to use the backup deed, to use the 2 deeds to collect twice, why would he have to say Shufli B'Hayara? Why say leave me alone for a little bit, leave me alone for a few years? V'Eikumba. So people think I own this land again. Tepik. Why doesn't he just pull out the star? He has 2 stars. Pull out the 2 stars and collect twice. To Kevan the Nokit Rei Shtare, since he's holding 2 stars, tarif, father tarif, he could go and get money, and then next week go and get money again. He says, Im ken the fishele bale dinin. If so, he's going to have a lot of people to contend with. You understand? If the buyer pulls out one deed, and then next month he pulls out another deed, it's going to look very suspicious. That's why part of the kanunya, part of the conspiracy, is he's telling the creditor, leave me alone for a few years. People will think it's my land again, and then you'll come seize the land again. We can't just do these things back to back. And it's a powerful message. If somebody's, every once in a while, we all have problems, we all have issues, we all have interpersonal, it's tension and stress. If it's happening all the time, it's something's going very wrong. We all have bad days, but if it's happening, often, and people keep pulling out the same star on you, emotional star or psychological star, something's going wrong. You might want to worry about some kanunya. Okay, good. So they say v'lichtov. So we have another suggestion. If there's a case of 2 stars, there's another way to fix the problem. V'lichtov l'hai star ma'alya. So write him a good star. V'lichtov tavra. Write a receipt. So you could write a backup star or a replacement star if it's erased or smudged for the one holding the deed. But you could write a receipt to the original seller. L'mocher, write a star receipt to the seller, and put in this receipt kol shtari de yapkin al arada, any star, any deed that comes out about this particular land. Pasulin is going to be pasul lavar, except min diapak b'zman except for the one with this particular date. So then they would know only the star with the new date, the replacement star, that's valid, and any other star, any backup star out there, or partially erased star with Rishuma Nika, or any quasi star would be invalid. So Mrur Banan Kamei the Rav Papa. So the rabbis told this halakha in front of Rav Papa, Va'amrei Lo Kamei the Rav Ashi, or in front of Rav Ashi, and they say Zosa Meris Ein Kodvin Shover. So we see from here we don't write receipts. If it would be just a simple eitzah, write the guy a receipt that says any other star except the replacement star is pasul, then that would be great. It's a great chap. It's a good idea. So write the guy a receipt. So we see from here we don't generally write receipts. Turning over to Amud Beis. Amar lahu, be'alma kozin shover. He says normally we would write a shover. Normally we would write a receipt in a similar case, v'hacha, but in this case where you're writing a replacement star, a backup star, hayinu taima. What's the reason? Adilma ozil balchov. Maybe the creditor will come v'tarif minei delakeach, and he's going to come and collect from the buyer of the field. So Ruvain sold to Shimon. Now Ruvain's creditor is going to come and take the field from Shimon. V'ozil ichi tarif l'kuchos. And then the buyer, Shimon, is going to come and take property from Ruvain, Vishover, Gabe Lekuchos, Leka. And those guys don't have a receipt. The guys who bought fields from Ruvain don't have a receipt. Now, Ruvain sold the field with Achrayas to Shimon. And Ruvain owed a bunch of money, so Shimon's coming and taking another field from Ruvain. What if Ruvain had no fields, but Ruvain had sold the field to Levi with Achrayas? So now Shimon's going to come to satisfy his debt from Ruvain. He's going to come and take a field out of Levi. And Levi's not holding a receipt. Only Ruvain, the original seller, is holding a receipt that says there's only one valid deed out there. There's only one star out there that's valid on this land. Levi doesn't have such a thing because Levi bought it from Ruvain. So we should be worried about that. So he could use two starot against two different guys. So they have no star, sof. But in the end, lekuchos love amrei. Why won't the lekuchos, the guys who purchased from Ruvain, they should go back to the mari da'ara, to the original owner of the land? That's Ruvain. They're going to go back to him to get paid. But meanwhile, before they go back to get paid by Ruvain, so it seems like the ball's in Ruvain's court. So shamit v'achil, he's going to be taking produce off this property and eating it. It could take months, it could take years sometimes if the court is slow. And meanwhile, this guy's sitting on the land illegally and eating all the fruit. Achil peri, iname, or also l'lokeach shelo b'charayos. It could be they purchased it without guarantee. Without a charayos, without guarantee means if my creditor comes and takes it. Sorry, I'm going to say Reuven's creditor. I hope my creditors are not listening to this year. If Reuven's creditor comes and takes it, then whoever bought that, Levi, who bought that field from Reuven, has recourse with a charayos. He can go back to Ruvain and get paid, but without a charayos, he has no recourse. And that's kind of why people do a title search. In Mishnaic times also they did title search and they asked around, but in modern times they do a title search and they find any claims to this property before you buy real property, because you don't want to be on the hook for those claims. Ihachi, if so, shtori halva nami. Why not a loan document? Why wouldn't we write a replacement loan document? Hasam dezuze masik. So thereby alone we could say, the borrower went and gave some zuz, he gave some money to the original lender and satisfied his debt. Amrei Paisei, and he was mephias him, and maybe he's mephias him saying, listen, I can't pay you the whole thing, but at least I'll pay you some of it. Mephiasei balchov bezuze, he could appease him with money. Hacha de'ara masik mediyode demand masik ara bezuze lo mephias. So here he's coming to get land. He's not coming to get paid money. He's coming to get land, and the land is right there in front of everybody. And someone's not going to take a little bit of money when there's a lot of land at stake. He's not going to be mephias. He's not going to give up his claim with that. He says you could write a replacement star without a charayos, again without the guarantee. And the charayos is very important because, again, if Reuven has creditors and those creditors take the field away from Shimon the buyer, Shimon can go back to Reuven and get reimbursed, or even go back to Reuven, people Reuven sold property to, and collect from them, and then they're going to have to go back to Reuven to get reimbursed. So without the achrayos, we would write a backup star, a backup deed without achrayos. Heichi kosvinan. So how do we write this? Amar Rav Nachman says, the kosve hachi, you write like this. Shtar Danan, our star, Delo Lemigva Bay. It's not written to collect with. It's not a valid star of collection. It might be a good proof of ownership, especially if there's Arabs coming and trying to take the land. Maybe it's a good proof of ownership, but it's not meant to collect with. Lo Mishabde, Lo Mibnei, not from property that's mishubad, property that's been sold, property Ruvain sold to Levi, and not from Bnei Chare. That means Bnei Chare is free man. It means free property, unencumbered properties that he has in hand. Elaki Heichi deed to take him ora bidei delokeach. This deed is not to collect with, it's only that this land should be in the hands of the purchaser or the recipient. So it sounds like this would be a good advice also for Abaye, who is writing the shtarot so that the Jewish landowners would be protected from the Arabs who are stealing the deeds. You could write a deed, at least for halachic reasons, you could write a deed that says it's not to collect with, it's not to get a achrayus with, it's just to say you own this land. So maybe Abaye wrote a regular deed with the half erased, so it could go to a secular court and they could actually get their land back. HaRav Chaim says, Zosomeris achrayut taut sofer hu. He says the fact that we have to write this phrase in the shtar, this deed is to show that he owns the land, but there's no achrayus, he can't go collect anything with this. This shows us achrayus tau sofer, that if there's no achrayus written in a shtar, in a deed for land, that's a tau sofer, a mistake of the sofer. And then what the Bezdin will do is they'll assume achrayus is there. So what's going on is, a shtar without achrayus, we assume that's a mistake, because everyone uses achrayus. That's great to use achrayus. If you want to have no achrayus in the deed, in this transaction, you have to write into the shtar, this is without achrayus, because a stam shtar is implied with achrayus. If it's not written in there, then the court will look at the shtar and say, yeah, the sofer probably left it out. So in the absence of a disclaimer saying no achrayus, we assume there's always achrayus. Achrayus taus sofer. Taima de kosav lehachi. So the reason is he wrote this extra phrase. Halo kosav lehachi. If he hadn't written this extra phrase disclaiming all achrayas, all right to reimbursement, halo kosav lehachi. If he hadn't written this, gobe, he'd be able to collect with this because achrayas taus over. We'd assume there's achrayas. Rav Ashi Amar achrayas love taus over. He disagrees. He says achrayas is not a lack of achrayas in a shtar is not the mistake of the sofer. You have to have it in the shtar, or the shtar does not allow you to go and collect from mishabodim. So what does the shtar mean when it means except, that we write him a replacement except for the guarantee in it? To lo kosev be'achrayas. We simply don't write achrayas in the replacement shtar. The original shtar had achrayas, it had a phrase saying he can come and collect property from Ruvain if Ruvain's creditors seize the field from him. And this shtar we simply leave it out because he holds achrayas is not taus sofer. We hold the halacha, I think the Shulchan Aruch says it is a taus sofer, and it is implied in transactions. It's typically the case that when somebody buys real estate, that they are also buying a certain level of security, that they have a right to go back to the original seller if the original seller had these outstanding liens on the property, or he owed people a lot of money. But again, it's always wise to do a title search and figure that out in advance. And the Gemara brings a story. There was a certain woman, she gave a large sum of money, lahahu gavra, to a certain real estate agent, lemizban le'ara, to buy her some property. So Baruch Hashem, in some ancient cultures 2,000 years ago, women were property. In Jewish culture 2,000 years ago, a lot of women could read and write and own money and buy property. And so she was in real estate. She was trying to get some real estate. Azol zovan la shelo b'achrayus. But the real estate agent went and used her money to buy property without achrayus. He didn't have achrayus written in the shtar. Rav Nachman. She comes to Rav Nachman complaining that she got a bad deal. Amrlei, so Rav Nachman says to the real estate agent, "L'tekune shadoticha." She sent you to be metaken, to fix up her situation, v'lo le'avute, not to make crooked her situation. Now, this is a famous line we use by a shaliach generally. The shaliach is supposed to do right by the mishaleach, by the principal. So the agent has to do right by the principal, not to make his or her life worse off. So here he's saying, you, the agent, the real estate agent, you made the mistake here. What do you have to do? Zeal, you have to go out, zovna minei, and buy shelo b'achrayus. You have to buy it from her. The field you bought for her, the property you bought for this woman, and there's no achrayus in the shtar, you have to buy it from her without achrayus. V'hadar zovna nirlei b'achrayus. And then you need to go sell it back to her with achrayus. So now the achrayus, instead of being on the original seller of the land, is going on the real estate agent who was the agent for this woman to invest, but his investment went wrong because he did not insist on achrayus being written in the shtar. So now he's going to have to write a new shtar for this woman, and the achrayus is going to be on the real estate agent. It was his mistake. It was his it's like professional negligence for a real estate agent representing a woman to not get a guarantee in her shtar when he buys for her. which Shimon Gamliel says, if you're giving a gift to your friend, v'hechzir lo et shtar, and you give him the shtar. So Reuven gives Shimon a shtar, and it's a shtar matana. I'm hereby giving you this, this pomegranate orchard in Yaffa, whatever it is, a beautiful, beautiful thing. He says, you know what? I've heard soni matanos yechie, that somebody who does not accept gifts, might live longer, and there's reasons for that. If somebody's beholden to gifts, there's a lot of people tugging at him. Someone gives you a gift, it's a beautiful thing. You should say thank you, and it's a very nice thing. But that you feel like you owe them. So he says, I've heard Soni Matanas Yechie, so I'm giving it back. And he says, so here, he already took the shtar, so he already has possession. But he says, listen, I'm just giving you the shtar back, just take it back. Hechzirlo at the shtar, chazar matanato. So according to Shimon Gamliel, simply giving back the shtar is enough to give back the entire gift. Hachamim omrim matanato kayemet. But the sages say, the gift goes through. As I mentioned, what the sages are saying is that shtar, that deed that's giving over that orchard or that property, it's a one-way shtar. The shtar basically says Reuven's giving it to Shimon, there's witnesses signing, so Reuven gave it to Shimon. And now Shimon's holding the shtar, and Shimon says, you know what, I've decided I don't want the gift, Soni Matanot Yechie, I'm giving you back the shtar. That's beautiful, but that shtar was a one-directional Kinyan document that already went through when he received the shtar. So you need a new Kinyan, according to the sages, to give back the property. Write up a new shtar, or have the original owner go down there and do a Kinyan chazaka on the land. Or you get some other kind of Kinyan to get it back. My time, Rav Shimon Gamliel, what's his reason that you could just give back the shtar? Am Ravasi Nasei Omer Lo Sodeze Netuna Lecha Kozman Shtar Biyadcha. So it's as if he's saying, when somebody's giving a gift with a shtar, it's as if the giver is saying, I want this field to be given to you as long as you're holding the shtar. He says that's the assumption of his mindset. Markiv la Rava. So Rava has a question on this. If so, nignav o ovid, if the shtar gets stolen or lost, nami, maybe the gift is no longer valid. Ela maraba ba'otiot niknav b'mesira kamifli. Really, they have a more fundamental machlokis. If otiot, letters, like ot can mean a sign, os hi le ol meyad benu veni about Shabbos, but osios means signs, means letters. Letters, the letters in the shtar, the words themselves in the shtar, if they're niknot b'mesira, if they are validly handed over with the halacha kinyan, simply by giving them. Now, actually, in Kedushin, we mentioned a kinyan mesira, just means giving over, and they were talking about giving over an animal, by a kinyan on an animal by handing over the leash or the reins. So if you're selling your horse or your donkey, and you don't want to make the donkey, it's hard to pull a donkey, Mashicha would obviously work. Mashicha is pulling, sometimes it's hard to pull a donkey, so there's a kinyan mesira, works in certain areas, like in his private property, of giving over the leash, giving over the reins. That's a mesira, just means handing over. Like we have a mesura that we hand over to the next generation. Mesira is the kinyan of handing something over. So when you hand somebody a shtar, are you just giving him a piece of paper, or are you also giving over the legally binding contents of that document to the guy you've just handed it to with your mesira? So that's the machlokes. Otiot niknot b'mesira kamuthige. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel savar otiot niknot b'mesira. He's holding the legally binding contents of this document legally belong to the recipient simply by handing over the document to Rabbanon Savre, but the sages say, Ein otiot niknot b'mesira. They say that otio, letters in a shtar, cannot be transacted simply by handing them over. You understand, a shtar is a very serious, legally binding piece of paper. It's transferring ownership of this real property. So just giving it to him, they hold, is not enough. They would do a kinyan, and you'll see this at a wedding when we write up the kesuva at the chassan's tish. And the chassan actually does a kinyan. If you're paying attention and you're not having too many l'chaims, you'll see usually the Mesader Kedushin will have the chassan pick up a pen or a sudar or make some sort of kinyan on the obligations of the kesuva. Now that doesn't mean the chassan owns the kesuva, he's about to give it to the kala, but it means he's on the hook for the otiot, for the letters that are written in that shtar. So you see, we do hold, like the sages, that it needs a transaction, a kinyan, for those contents of the shtar to be legally binding. So in this case, where he's trying to give the gift back, even if he's holding the shtar, he says, listen, I didn't do a kinyan, I didn't do a sudar, we didn't do any kinyan on this, I'm giving you back the gift. That would be valid according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Yishar kohachem, tiskul mitzvahs.